In this video, I'm going to show you how to turn your finished cross stitch into a hanging banner. For this tutorial, I used the Vote As If stitch along as an example. The link to this pattern is in the description. For this video, you're going to need, of course, your finished cross stitch, poster frame that you plan to use, pins, thread or embroidery floss, a needle, I have it here on my needle minder, fabric shears, measuring tape, a marker, a pen, or fabric chalk. Low-loft quilt batting. The first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that your project is clean and ironed, and I will put links in the description for tutorials about how to wash and iron your finished cross stitch project. You also need to iron your backing fabric. Then you need to cut everything to size. So these are pre-cut. My cross stitch project has enough fabric on all four sides for the amount of fabric that I want to show when I'm done, plus a 1/2 inch to an inch of extra fabric for the hem on the left and the right, and on the top and the bottom about an extra 1/2 inch to an inch of fabric that is going to be grabbed by these magnetic poster frames. Then I cut my backing fabric to be about the same size as my cross stitch fabric. If it's a little bigger or a little smaller, that's okay. The top and the bottom, we actually want it to be about the same size. We can always trim it, and then left to right, it won't show. And then the quilt batting is about the size of my stitches. And I just used a Sharpie. I placed this over my fabric and I used a Sharpie to mark the batting, and then I used my fabric shears to cut along the marks I made with the Sharpie to get this to the size that I wanted. This is optional. You don't really have to do the quilt batting for this project. I prefer it. It gives it a little fluff, a little heft, a little thickness. And just in case your backing fabric is lighter, you wouldn't want your stitches to show through your backing fabric when this is all done. I mean, chances are nobody's going to look at the back, but it helps. All right, so the next step, what we are going to do is we are going to put our project and our backing fabric face to face, and we are going to pin them in place with our pins. I'm going to pin them outside to inside because I am going to be stitching this by hand and I don't want to stick myself. You only need enough pins to keep it from moving around, so every 2 or 3 inches is probably fine. It doesn't even have to be perfectly straight. That's one of the things I love about finishing this way, is that everything doesn't have to be perfect. You only need to pin the 2 sides. That is where we are going to be attaching them together. The top and the bottom are going to be left open. All right, now that that is attached, you're going to flip it over. So here's where you have to make your final decision about how much fabric you want to show on either side of your project. This is on 18 count. I'm going to go with 4 squares. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch the 2 sides by hand. I'm going to stitch them by hand 4 squares outside of my project. You can do this with a sewing machine, but this part does need to be pretty straight. So here I have sewn, I've just used a running stitch to go down and stitch the backing fabric to my project. Again, they are inside out. I've stitched the front of my project to the front of my backing fabric. And it occurred to me after I got stabbed in the pinky by the needle that I probably should have just used these wonder clips that I have. They're really good for stuff like this. And so again, I will put the link for these in the description below. So the next step is to attach the quilting batting. This is low-loft quilting batting, and you can see it's quite thin. And what I've done is I've cut the batting to match about the size of my stitching, and it is going to be a little bit smaller than where I attached the back of the fabric. So no matter where you decide, how much leeway you decide to give yourself on the front, I've only given myself 4 fabric squares from my stitching to attach the backing fabric. you're going to want the quilting to be a little bit smaller than that area. And next I'm going to use a basting stitch to baste the flap of my extra fabric to the quilting. I've threaded my needle with a little loop at the end, so basically I just fold it in half and I have both ends of the thread on one side of the needle and then on the eye of the needle, and then on the other side of the eye of the needle is the loop. Let's see, I'm going to start here, and I want to make sure that the edge of where the fold is where you can see my stitches. And you can pre-iron this, that might help. I'm just going to go ahead for time's sake and start stitching. So when you go through, you want to make sure that you are not catching your project on the other side. You just want to go through the batting with this running stitch. There, I've got my loop start. So this is secure, and it's just a very informal, a very quick stitch. You're just catching the batting under the fabric. This is just to make sure that the batting stays in place. It doesn't move around after you hang up your poster banner project. Okay, I've come to the end, and because of the way I stitched this, I'm just going to flip it over and make sure that I didn't go all the way through to the back and you don't see any stitching on the other side. And I'm going to run my hand under in between the fabric. There we go, that looks good. I'm going to, let's see, take my needle off of the thread, tie off this end. I'm going to just put a quick little knot here to make sure it doesn't slip out too much. Go ahead and trim that. And I'm going to turn this inside out. I'm going to turn this right side out just to make sure that I did not catch my project at all. Yep, that all looks really good. So now I'm going to turn it back inside out, and I'm going to stitch the other side. I'm just using my regular tapestry needle for this. I am not using a very pointy needle for this because, again, I only want to catch the batting. I don't want to go through to my project. So when I stick the needle in, you can see I'm picking up the whole thing at first, and then I'm just kind of pulling my needle back a little bit so that only the white stuff gets picked up. Let's make sure this is getting folded along the right place. There's my stitching there, so that's where I'm folding this. Now let's get this started. So as I'm putting my needle through at an angle here, I can feel that it's catching the Aida cloth beneath, which I don't want. So I'm just backing up my needle and I'm lifting it till I feel the Aida fall off the tip of the needle. But when I raise it, I can see that I'm still lifting the batting. So, but it's a very loose stitch. So if you do get your project caught, it's very easy to just pull it right out. All right, so I've got both sides down. This is nice and flat. I'm going to, I'm going to flip it inside out all the way this time and make sure that I didn't catch the front at all. All right, so the front of my project is completely independent of the back. And I've got a little bump in here, and this is why we wanted to make sure that the batting is smaller than the project. So if I just stretch this out a little bit, it's going to lie nice and flat. There we go. So that looks good. I'm going to run this under the iron and get these edges to lie a little bit more flat so that the magnets on the poster board have less material or less space to attach to each other. And so here's my piece, nice and ironed. You can see this is nice and flat. The back is not folding over and showing to the front. I've got a little bit of space here. It's got a little meat. So here's the easy part. I'm going to attach the poster frame. So these are magnets. You just pull them apart. I'm going to put my fabric in here. Now this is why we want to make sure that the batting is shorter than the edge of your project fabric and the edge of your backing fabric, because it makes it a lot easier for these magnets to grab, but they are plenty strong. Oh, see, I've got some frayed edges sticking out a little bit, so let me just remove those. Lining up the bottom of my fabric to go just past the magnet, and then just place this right on top. And then we'll do the top. Again, I'm going to remove some of these frayed edges. I'm going to make sure that your hanging string is in the right position. Going to back up the camera so you could see the whole thing. Now there is more space on the top and the bottom, so I'm probably going to go ahead and trim that and then reposition the banner frame. Right, so here's what it looks like close up. There's the bottom, there's the top. I had trimmed a little bit off the bottom and the top so that there wouldn't be so much space and it would look more spatially kind of matched to the left and the right. And that's how you turn your finished cross stitch into a hanging banner.